Hi everyone, welcome. We're down here in my wormery and I'm preparing to check in on a batch of worms just recently introduced to indoor living. These are the worms that used to occupy what I had referred to as outdoor worm bag version 5.0, and we've even got a little souvenir here, the plywood, painted plywood top cover of what had been the outdoor worm bag version 5.0. These are the now just indoor red wigglers. They are kind of set apart from the rest just by the way we've been feeding them lately, which is just to go from corner to corner, something we've been referring to as pocket feedings. It's been 12 days since the last check-in and feeding, and I think they're probably due. Nice thing is we've still got a fresh corner that's never been fed yet. It'll be the fourth pocket feeding, and well, I guess we'll have to see what we see when we get in there. Let's put on the glove, get the system up on the bench, and we can get started. What I've got for them is just a variety of different frozen veggies. I see some cucumber peels, potato, probably other things. I see radish bits. There's a few soiled napkins here too that I'm going to use as bedding, so let's get into it. What do we got going on here? This is still just sort of like the souvenir, reminding us where these worms came from. I guess at some point these little guys will have to take on their own little bit of a personality, so they have to stop relying on their parent system. Oops. Well, as you can see, I was trying to be careful to see if we can get another use out of this top covering newspaper. Evicting some worms slowly, but dug my finger in a little bit too strong there. This thing's definitely holding up well enough to be used one more time, even though I just put a big gash into it. And you know, as you saw on the foods that they're getting, there was no coffee for today, so being able to reuse the feeding zone indicator from last time was something that I had been hoping for. You can see they've been nibbling on this thing a little bit around the edges, and it is folded over, so it's kind of two-ply. But it's going to serve as feeding zone indicator once again, and we're going to be moving it right over there, which is where we're going to feed. But like we usually do, we just uncovered the feeding zone from last time. After 12 days, I'll be curious to see how they've managed with the foods that they were given. They got a big roll, like half of a roll that was all moldy, some moldy bread. Every time we've gone into the feeding zones and we've seen where pastries and other baked goods were put, we typically found leftovers. That's what I'm thinking we're seeing here. You can see mold has taken over. That I sort of expected. If it was going to be leftovers of the bread, I expected it to be moldy. And it was a lot, you know, but I did attempt to break it apart. It was kind of dampened before we put it in here, and I was able to break it apart in large part into little chunks. Figured if I'd be able to do it even more today, then I would help out in that one way. But typically we like to just leave the foods as we put them in. I mean, to check them out is fair, but I also don't want to be helping things along too much. It is interesting to see how they manage on their own without my help. Well, it does seem like the stuff is making progress. Besides the bread, there was cabbage placed in here too. I would assume that the better part of the cabbage is probably gone for the most part. What we're seeing here is probably just leftovers of the bread type materials. This is like a chunk of corn cob that must have come with the worms from their old home. You know, we're not just going to cut straight over to where we're feeding today. We'll get to that corner last. There's probably virtually no action there last time. When we opened that corner last time to put the food in there, the last two feedings had been over here. So going here is 2 feedings ago, going here is 3 feedings ago. And there was a lot of worm activity on this edge of the bin. And since I didn't really get the sense that, oh my goodness, I definitely didn't get the sense that there was a big mob scene on the bread, so it was fair to assume that they're still here working down the leftovers of a couple banana peels that were in that corner. Not much of that left. There was some other stuff, I believe, other leftovers, but they're not quite done with it, as you can see. And I guess out of curiosity to go back even one more feeding, which is also showing a pretty good population of worms hanging out in there, finishing off whatever it is that we fed there last time. But it's going quite a way back. I've got another system where I'm just alternating side to side with the locations where I'm feeding. Here we're going from corner to corner. I'm not keeping any sort of document, but on that other system where we're just ping-ponging from side to side, I am keeping little records of what was fed each time and how much time has passed since that particular food item was placed in. Here we're just kind of doing things a little bit more loosey-goosey. Although, you know, these banana peel chunks probably should be placed back down where they were. Back in the feeding zone. The rest of the stuff in each of the feeding zones was pretty nicely tilled up there, though, you got to admit. Quite an invasive check-in, but, you know, at this point, we're going to be saving this feeding zone indicator so that we can cover up where we put today's food item. The other thing that was added last time to the previous feeding, before we get completely off this corner here, a lot of bedding, you know? So I think that's what we were seeing here. Big chunks of cardboard. I had a whole bunch of cardboard that was already quite damp and weathered, and it was all broken into even smaller pieces to include as part of the feeding. Everything was kind of layered in nicely. Cardboard, cabbage, bread, so on and so forth. So whatever, I just figured since today's bedding of choice is napkins, I didn't have a chance before to mention how the bedding of choice the previous time had been cardboard, kind of reused cardboard. So let's get those napkins in here. I guess one option would have been to use the old top covering newspaper. And now that I've kind of put my finger through it and that it's had a couple cycles out here in that duty, in that service, perhaps next time we can reuse the top covering newspaper and put it down into the feeding as supplementary bedding. Give ourselves a nice replacement top covering. You know, I put a couple things off here on the side. I just managed to forget to put some of this stuff in. So this is grit. This is worm chow. Figured let's get some of that in here too before I space out and forget to give them what I intend to. Good bit of frost coming along with today's feeding too. I think that gives them their portion. I think I see some bits of, that's cucumber too, so I think we already kind of identified the types of foods that are going in. Nothing terribly interesting, just your typical kitchen scraps feeding. And with these little guys, I believe, even though this is feeding number 4 as far as pocket style or pocket feedings in the corners, this was actually feeding number 6 overall. So, you know, before we got into the pocket feeding regimen, we did do a couple traditional feedings down the middle, but those were quite some time ago at this point. And, you know, our feeding zone indicator, I think, is going to be due for a replacement soon. But for now, we're continuing on using the old one. Same thing with the top covering newspaper here, which is actually holding together quite nicely. I think I just flipped it over. Oops, and I put another tear in it right there. So that's okay. This is its last time to serve in this capacity. Next time it will definitely be supplementary bedding as part of the feeding. All right, everyone, that's it for the check-in with the red wigglers that had been originally bought indoors to help us get a little bit more manageability over the environment they've been living in, help us dry it and migrate the worms out of it. And for now, we're still sort of sticking to the legacy, so they get to wear the colors for a little while longer, but I'm sure it's just a matter of time before we end up coming up with some sort of an identity for these little guys that will help them kind of settle in and become part of the worm farm here in my basement. All right, everyone, that's it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.